Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about stories. That was it. I forgot the name of the talk. I can't see it on here, but it was about stories. And I was working on. Some of you know I do script writing, and I was working on a project that I'm doing, a creative project today, and I was just finishing it. And one of the speeches at the end, so the last character, one of their speeches was about the stories that define us, and basically, I'll tell you what, the kind of along the lines of what this character said at the end of the script. So she's just having a big realization, and she talks about how the Aboriginal people in Australia, how they sing in order to know their environment. So they sing maps. So they know their environment through song. So they sing to each other to be able to find different locations. A lot of the Australian tribes are nomads, so they travel around the country dependent on the time of the year. And in order to find the different places, they remember it through song. And I just thought that was so beautiful when I heard this. So the character in the play is talking about that, and she says she wondered how she would see the world if she knew the world through song. And then she realizes that we're just as creative, but instead of knowing our environment through songs, we know it through stories. So our whole life as Westerners is based on storytelling. We tell each other stories in order to know our environment, in order to know where the bank is, to know how to behave with someone, how to treat someone. We're just not aware that we're always relating to our environment through storytelling. And then she goes on to talk about a story between her and her father and blah, blah, blah. But I just thought it was so beautiful that we know our environment through stories. It's just that we get lost in stories. But we believe that they're true and they're real, and we don't see that we're seeing our environment dependent on the stories that we tell ourselves. So we're seeing it as a good environment or a bad environment or a scary environment, dependent on the story we tell ourselves about life and who we are. And our emotional body and our experience, our physical experience, is dependent on those stories. The fundamental story, the first story that we invent, is that we're somebody inside this body living in relationship to a world. And rather than seeing that as a story, we see that as a truth. We see that as a reality, and it's not a truth. It's not a reality. It's a story we've told in order to navigate the difference between one body and another body. But then we begin to live in it, and we begin to believe that's true, and believe the story of free will and choice and action is true. And so many people get bogged down in that. We're telling ourselves stories continuously that we can't make it, that we can make it, that we're better than others, we're not as good as others, that this is going to happen, that terrible things are going to happen or good things are going to happen. And our thoughts really affect our environment, the way we behave with our environment, the things we do. But the thing that's really amazing is it's nobody's story. It's nobody's thought. So even if you feel guilty now about the way you think or the stories you tell yourself, it's not actually anybody's stories or thoughts, because who is that person? Who's creating all of this? Because you, who you believe yourself to be, is also a story. It's not actually the way it is. It's also a story. So who even creates those stories? Because everything you tell yourself is a story. Everything you think you know is a story about your environment, about your life. And it can be told from a billion other perspectives. There's no truth. And this is why we suffer so much in relationships, because they have one story about what the relationship is and you have another story, and then you both try to find a middle ground of what you think truth is, and there is no truth. There's only what's happening. And actually, what's more reliable is your intuitive feeling about what's happening. Like your intuitive flow, there's a flow that happens beyond the story of you, beyond what you think, beyond the idea that I've got free will or not free will. There is a flow that manifests as this character and how this character should move or not move. But then it gets muddled up into stories and it gets all confused. It's like, no, you're not allowed to behave like that. You have to do this. You do. And then the person gets more and more squashed into a story that it has to live of itself. It has to behave like this. It has to have a degree. It has to have a certain amount of money. It has to behave like this. Has to do that. And all of these rules and stories are helpful to make our society run in a way. But they're not truth. They're not actually speaking about you. And when you're trying to live up to that, when you're trying to present yourself as that story that you've created for yourself, then you become limited and contracted and stuck inside a small and narrow box, and you feel uncomfortable, and that discomfort creates this idea that you don't want to be where you are right here. You don't want to be in this moment. You want to be somewhere else. So most people are living a life that they're always trying to get out of. They're always trying to get away from because they don't feel comfortable. Their body feels tight and contracted, and the discomfort that you feel in your body all comes from storytelling. So there is pain. So some people have pain that's like formed from the fact that their body's, not working properly and functioning properly. But a lot of people's pain is psychosomatic, and what that means is that you tell a story about yourself and then you live up to that story, or you try to live up to that story, or you feel really disempowered by that story. So say if you're interacting with somebody at work every day that's really puts you down a lot, and your story about them is that you don't feel good enough, but maybe you're not even aware that you don't feel good enough around that person. Maybe your story is how much you dislike that person, and really underneath it's that you don't feel good enough and you feel shamed and you feel that nobody likes you. But on the top surface, maybe there's lots of hate that comes out. Every time you go into work and face that situation and that story, that thought process that you might not be conscious of is coming up, it's most probably hurting your heart. It's most probably making your shoulders tense. And then you actually have physical pain in your body, and it feels like it's a physical pain, but it's an emotional pain. And sometimes people go to the doctors with, say, shoulder ache or heartache or heart problems, and it's got nothing to do with heart problems or shoulder. It's that they think that they're not good enough and that everyone's better themselves. So they're always holding their body in a tense position. Or maybe they're stressed about their finances, so they're always like, and the jaw is, they're always tense. And then that forms who you are, and you feel really uncomfortable in all these boxes, and then you seek to find solutions in time, always looking, what's the next solution? What can I live in? What story can I tell myself that makes me feel better? And you can have stories that are more positive, and I would recommend you to recondition yourself to be more positive and more open and more loving and more like in wonder, in mystery. But the true freedom is recognizing that who you are is this moment, it's everything that's happening here, and that you're not separate from this moment. The truth of life is that it is, and it's like one organism evolving. So we look at all these objects and we think they're separate, but it's just the way that we look. So say when we look at Lisa's body, we think she's one organism that's separate, like it's one organism and it's like a solid organism. But if you look closely at me and break me down, you realize that I'm made up of many things. I'm made up of water, bone, tissue, muscle, brain, enormous brain, eyes, but I don't know, all these different things, skin. And then you can go even further into that and further into that and further into that until you begin to get to atoms and particles. And then you begin to realize, hang on, Lisa is made up of many things, and these many things all function together and make one flow. And on the human level, it appears that I'm a human interacting with you. On a bacteria level, I'm sure I don't look like a human. I look like all these smaller particles, like all these smaller things made up of, like there may be interest in other bacterial things that are rotting. But from a human level, I look like I'm a human moving. But this world is like that too. Like we think that we're separate from our environment, but our world is like one thing functioning. You can almost look at it as like a flower. If you zoom out enough, it looks like a flower. It looks like everything in this world, on this planet, is moving as one. And we're all humans, like in here fighting for our own survival, thinking we're separate from things, taking. But we're all part of this one organism that's flourishing and evolving. And it's so super beautiful. And my words now don't come out of a separate Lisa that can be all proud, like, oh yes, look at me, I have very big chest. Rather than it being Lisa, it's coming out of everything. It's coming out of the whole world. It's coming out of this world that's evolving, and it's like speaking to itself, just like the water and the blood mixing together to make my heart pump into, I don't know what it does. It goes around here and it puts oxygen. Like all these things work together to make this living mechanism that looks like Lisa, just like all of us come together to make this beautiful flower of our planet. And then we all try to be like, in our little groups, like, me, I'm behaving like myself. And we suffer over that because there is no separation. Like my thoughts come from all other humans. If we hadn't evolved to be able to speak, I wouldn't be able to say these words to you. It comes from all the thinkers and all the meditators and spiritual people of the past, and it's got nothing to do with me. I'm just an instrument now which is saying it. And then one day these words will move on to another instrument and they will speak it out. Woof, Khaleesi. And Khaleesi's woof comes from all the dogs that have been before. If there hadn't been all these dogs from before, come on in, Lucy. There hadn't been all these dogs from, hello, yes, you are wonderful. Then Khaleesi would never bark, and she'd never have a pointy nose and big teeth and big, beautiful ears, and there'd never be the amazing creation we know as Khaleesi. Ay, 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 ay. So I got a bit excited then, and then just started squeaking. Happens, Khaleesi, sometimes, doesn't it? We get excited and we turn into a squeak once again. There is no separate squeak. That squeak comes from all other squeaks. you begin to respect me as a public speaker that says all those wonderful things, and then you watch me and then you're like, ah, yeah, she's human. She squeaks. She sings to her dog. It's so beautiful. It's total and utter love, this subject. It is love. I love E. And what I'm doing when I'm singing is I'm actually doing something very positive, which is sending positive chemicals around my body. And I recommend it to you. Singing makes you feel really good. And I'm a terrible singer. I cannot stay in tune, but I love doing it. So that's the end of that. Let's see if there's any questions. I hope it's all going nicely, the video and the audio. This is what I'm going to try and hopefully use when I'm in India.